When you think of the word events, you're probably used to concerts and conferences with lots of people coming together. But in 2020, events mean something very different, and you're probably more familiar with video calls and virtual worlds than you are with lots of people coming together. If your organisation is trying to figure out how you can turn your physical events into virtual experiences, well, this video is going to hopefully take you through some step-by-step tips and advice for how you can plan a digital event. So the first step to planning your digital event isn't too dissimilar to a physical event. It starts with your strategy. What is your event trying to achieve? What do you want your customers or your audience to gain from your particular event, and why are you doing it? Take time to note down all the particular opportunities you're trying to maximise and figure out what the purpose of the event is all about. Often, despite even having to plan a digital event, your core purpose for your event can still take place in your virtual environment. Are you trying to bring together different delegates to connect with each other? Are you trying to entertain an audience? Or perhaps you're trying to celebrate your staff's achievement? All of these things can be done just as well with a digital event as they could face to face. Once you know what you're trying to achieve, the next step is to think about your audience. What are they trying to achieve? What is your audience doing during the day? What time do they have available? What are their goals that they're trying to achieve? What technology are they used to using? Break down as much information as you can about your potential audience and what they want, and this will help you come up with the right concept to fit your digital event with what your audience is trying to get done. The next steps, once you've figured out why your event is happening, both for you and the audience, is to figure out what is going to happen at the event. This is to define what the concept of your virtual event is going to be. This is the stage, which is quite fun, where you get to come up with lots of different ideas for how you can impart the information to the audience. Is it about entertainment? Perhaps you can think of lots of different ideas, from pub quizzes to socials to interactive games. Or is it about education? Is it about having different guest speakers, breakout room discussions or other activities? You're trying to figure out, does your virtual event need to be live, so everyone has to engage at the same time? Does it need to be interactive for lots of people to participate? Or is it about the content? Come up with lots of different potential concepts that align with what you're trying to achieve and work best with the audience that you're going to be targeting. When coming up with your concept, particularly for a digital event, the main thing to focus on is, what is the audience going to get out of your event? What's the outcome? We are really busy people, and remember, you're going to be competing not just with other events, but with Netflix, with families, with other personal commitments. So when people are at home engaging with your event, you have to make sure that you're going to get something really clear out of it from each different activity. So align that to your concept and make sure you've come up with something that really works well for what your audience wants. Once you've got a rough idea of what your concept is, the next thing, as you can imagine with an event, is your date, time and location in a digital space. So again, aligning to that audience, figure out what time and date is going to be working for them. Does your audience have childcare commitments? Is this going to interfere with their personal lives at home? Is an evening event potentially better for them? Or perhaps it's something to do with bringing lots of work colleagues together. Or perhaps you have an audience all around the world, which is a possibility with virtual events. So brainstorm with your team and test that with a potential customer to find the best date and time to start with. This may change as you go through the planning process, but it's good to have a place to start. At this point, you also now need to start thinking about the location, the digital space and services you're going to be using with your event. Do you want a main event webpage where all of the information is going to be embedded onto? Do you want to use digital platforms such as YouTube for live streaming perhaps, or Zoom for an interactive discussion space, or perhaps you want to use social media as a platform? Brainstorm all the different options and choose a clear space. The main thing with a digital event is to make sure the audience can really clearly access all the information they need. They don't want to be clicking around looking for lots of different information. When choosing your platform as well, it's also worth considering how open you want the event to be. Some platforms like YouTube could allow anyone in the world to engage with your event, while others, like a closed Zoom webinar, might mean it's invite only. Make sure you've incorporated that into your decision for the online event. The next step, once you've got the outline of your event, is to book those key activities that are going to be taking place. This could be a keynote speaker, it could be your host, or it could be your entertainment. This is going to be the main focus that attracts customers to your event. So make sure you find a date and find a time that works for that speaker and get it booked into their diary. As well as the main focus, you may also want to have a think about additional activities that you might have involved. If your event is trying to encourage collaboration, you maybe want some breakout spaces or networking activities that you could book into that schedule. You may also want to have some fringe events going on, some social activities that happen on the side. There could be secondary speakers or secondary entertainers. So brainstorm all of that and start putting together your schedule of what's going to be happening at the event. Beyond the key elements of your event, you also need to make sure that you're planning for the experience of how the audience is going to feel when they're engaging with your event. Now, with a digital event, that is a lot harder. You may need to come up with lots of different creative ways of keeping your audience engaged with your online event. This could be through tactics such as having quizzes where people have to interact in some way, interactive polls, using social media, having little small breakout rooms for discussions, having variety in the content so that they're constantly having a change in what they're observing and interacting with. You could have competitions and all sorts of other creative ways that make people feel that they are part of the event. Next is to reflect on all of those elements you've got, including your key speakers and entertainment. Figure out what is the cost of all of those aspects and figure out, are you going to be able to afford to run this event yourself in-house with your own budget, or may you have to charge attendees money or find other revenue sources? Of course, digital events can go either way. In some cases they can be much cheaper to run because everybody's at home and the technology in the venue space is much lighter. But on the other hand, you may require more time, more technology, more software to run that event. So make sure if you're used to planning an event at a certain budget, you reevaluate that for this digital space. Equally, if you are used to charging customers to come to your event, remember, can you still charge that same amount? How much are your customers willing to spend if they're interacting online, and does the experience match up with what they're used to paying? Reflect on these two elements and then decide what your pricing strategy for the event is. Is it free and open to everyone covered by your company? Or do you have pricing models such as you pay a certain amount for attending all the events live, but you can pay extra to get extended access over a week or a month, which is seen with virtual events? Or perhaps people pay a minimum price for a certain amount of features, but if they want to engage with certain activities or additional speakers or additional entertainment, they have to pay different levels of pricing. These are models you're not potentially used to with a physical event, but you can consider all sorts of ways of creating value from your digital event that allows your customer to be able to pay and interact in the best way possible for them and their time scale. Once you've figured out what your event is going to be and how much it's going to cost, you can now start creating your event website and your booking platform. Now, with a physical event, it's quite easy to know who's there. You can count the people through the door and can give them delegate badges to keep track of them. With a digital event, it's slightly harder. So you've got a decision. Do you want your event to be open, which means that anyone from around the world can engage, a much larger audience than it would be possible with a set geographical area for a physical event? Or do you want to be able to track the attendees and allow them to book in advance to make sure you capture that data? Data is going to be a really important point for your digital event to make sure you know how many people are engaging. Typically, even though you might have set up a booking system in advance, the drop-off rate for digital events is slightly higher because you know what it's like. Instead of joining a webinar, it's quite easy to escape, rather than being on a bus or a train and having to travel to a venue. So have a think about how you're going to be able to manage and track the data of your customers and get accurate readings on how many people engage. And that might come into your decision-making process when choosing a booking system, such as, do you want Eventbrite? Do you want to use the Zoom booking system? Do you want to set up a Facebook event? Or is it an invite-only email system? Or is it open on a website for everyone to access? Think about that and set up the infrastructure for people to engage with your event and find all of the information they need, including the speakers, the times, the joining instructions on a clear website that is ready to go for them to interact with. Next up is one of the most challenging things with a digital event, and that is to organise your logistics. So you may have lots of different elements going on with your event. So things like having live streams, that can be quite challenging, making sure you've got all the technology connected. In order to minimise the risk of internet drop-off, for example, you might have some pre-recorded videos. So the logistics of coordinating and managing all them can be quite challenging. The logistics of getting different systems embedded onto your website. So the top tips are to experiment with as many systems as possible in advance, and from the audience perspective, make it as simple and clean as possible. From your perspective, it might be quite technical and challenging to get it all working, to make sure that microphones are working and you've set up the right etiquette for all of your speakers to make sure that they know when they're coming in and why. So have a test of all of these logistical elements in advance is the best tip possible. Test the Zoom links, test the live streaming onto whatever platform you're using, and make sure you have a really clear technical running order for what's happening. Who's joining when, what systems need to be on, what button needs to be pushed. All of that can be practiced in advance to make sure that logistically the event can run as smoothly as possible. A top tip to increase the production quality of any live streaming is, where possible, try to use a professional camera and connect that up to your laptop with a USB cable to run it as a webcam. Lots of different camera companies have different plugins to allow you to do this, and it will significantly increase the quality of any live streaming that you're doing for your virtual event. Next, once you've worked out all of the tricky little bits that come with setting up the logistical requirements for your event, is planning your risks. Of course, even though you might not be in a physical venue, you still need to make sure you've done a risk assessment. You might not have as many physical risks, but there are things like, what happens if the internet goes down for you or your guest speakers? Can you quickly cut to some other activity that's taking place? Can you redirect the guests? Can you have pre-recorded videos that you can play? That's an important part of your contingency plan for any risks like that. Other potential hazards you might want to consider for a virtual event are things like Zoom bombing. This is a phenomena where non-registered attendees can join your event and cause a little bit of chaos, perhaps turning their microphones on and playing loud noises, or having their videos play something that shouldn't be seen by an audience. All of that needs to be controlled and managed in your processes. You may also have things like chat rooms where you need to monitor for language or other different comments that might be coming up. And other risks might be, what happens if people do drop off and you don't get enough attendees? So consider all of the potential what ifs that could cause an impact to your event, and make your contingency plan. Outline what's going to happen and what you would do to solve this. So making sure that you have backup recordings, or having a full pre-made version of your digital event available for the audience to watch in the case that the live elements just can't happen at all. All of that should come into consideration with your risk assessment for your virtual event. By this point, you've got the planning underway, you know what's happening, and next is to market your event. Now, with digital events, this will rely heavily on things like email marketing and social media to attract your attendees' attention. So again, go back to that audience. What platforms are they on? What are they interacting with? Do you need to do some social media marketing on Instagram and Facebook to try and attract the audience? Or perhaps you already have an established list of emails that you want to specially invite. Come up with a plan and make sure the messaging relates to what they're going to get out of it. We are all getting lots of different digital event requests and lots of demands for our time, so make sure your messaging is punchy to the point to say, this is the benefit you will get from this digital event. As clear as you can get. If you can get 5 things you'll get out of this particular webinar, things like that really are better at attracting an audience to make sure they are likely to engage and be involved. As the day of the event approaches, communication is key. Make sure you capture as much information about who is interested in your event as possible, and send them reminders just before the event, giving them really clear instructions as to where they need to go and what they're going to get out of the event, to remind them and encourage them to participate. On the day of your event, make sure your team all have really clear established roles. You might have front of house roles. That could be if you are being the host of the event, for example, managing the quiz or hosting the different activities. You might need to make sure that you are publicly available and telling the attendees what's happening, engaging them on social media, reminding them about the interactions, and you'll have a really clear role to do at that point. You may be a back of house organiser where you have lots of different participants engaging and being involved in different areas. In that case, your job is to make sure the technical infrastructure stays up to date, making sure people are clearly informed, and keeping all of your different speakers or participants or entertainment aligned to what time they need to be involved in, and that they know exactly the technical way that they engage. Once the event is all done and dusted, remember to celebrate with your team. Hopefully it has been a success, and make sure you're sending thank you messages out to all of the participants and all of the different entertainers and speakers who got involved with your event. You may want to consider running a feedback survey to try and get some more information about how the event went, and you may have some follow-up tasks like sending out the winners of the competitions or quizzes or other games you might have run to keep the audience engaged during the event itself. Hopefully you've been able to work through these steps and take something from our top tips about how to plan your next digital event. Remember to keep an eye out on all these best practice examples that are happening around the world, from Zoom weddings to virtual reality exhibitions. There's loads of ways that you can incorporate being online and running a successful experience for your audience. We'd like to wish you all the very best with planning your next digital event.